Hello again, everyone. I guess this is the fourth psalm that get to bring to you. Started out just right at the front. If you thought I was going to do all 150 of them, I'm not going to. I'm skipping around here a little bit. Jumped ahead, reading through it, and thought Psalm 13 might be a good one. A number of levels, really. Given the times that we're in and the struggles that we're facing, but a couple of other reasons too. It really is a psalm that David writes and gets at his heart in the middle of pain, and a pain that isn't going away real easy. Not like you snap your fingers, pray God take it away, and he just takes it away. He's struggling through this, and he records a song about it, and I thought it might be useful. I'm just going to theme it out, Lord, how long? A couple of thoughts to take into it as we look at it that I thought would be worthwhile. Oftentimes, I get the impression anyway that we might tend to equate our emotions with our faith, and so you can think on the one hand, if I'm worried and I'm filled with anxiety, or I'm sad, does that mean I'm weak of faith, or I have no faith, or I'm an unbeliever? Or the other side of it is if since I'm a believer, that I should be happy all the time, that joy should be mine. And I think it's a good thought to bring into the heart of David, which is really what he's exposing here in song, and see what's going on with him as a faithful believer. And if these two things, faith and joy, aren't immediately hooked up and in sync and absolutely indicative of each other, then where does joy fit in my faith? Paul has a whole letter to the Philippians that the theme is joy. That there's almost no argument about that for those who dissect these things and look at them. So obviously joy and happiness, I suppose, if you want to equate it with joy, has a place in the Christian faith. Where is that? So we'll dive into the psalm and hopefully we'll look at these things and get some kind of, maybe not definitive answer, but give us enough to think about and put some perspective on these things. Psalm 13 again has a header on it. David wrote this song and he had in mind the choir director. Director of music, we don't exactly know what the term is, but it seems like probably we would call him a choir director. That this is intended for, that he would have use of. Verse 1, and the first two verses have the same phrase 4 times, and it's how long, and you'll see it come up in the English translation too. And so when you see these phrases come up repeatedly, it becomes a thematic thing. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And so David is expressing, you see it already, expressing this idea that he's struggling, and for him it appears, and he's thinking, and he's wrestling internally with the idea that God has forgotten him, that God has no care for him. And it's one thing to forget the memory, but if it impacts another person, it's a different thing. And I think of maybe a parent who might, I'm not playing true confessions here, but say you would forget your child in the car seat, and when you went somewhere and you come back, a half an hour later, and oh my gosh, there's your child screaming in the locked car with the windows closed, and I totally forgot. And as a parent, I can understand that happening again to my kids. I never did that to you. That I'm aware of. I forgot about it. But that's the idea. David is saying, have you forgotten me here? And in fact, he's really saying you did. You have forgotten. Will this continue on? Will this be a forgotten thing? How long will you hide your face from me? Which is, again, in Hebrew poetry, isn't a totally different thing, but adds a different dimension and a perspective on it. To hide the face from. A mother is fully aware of what is going on with her young child. She's observing, we would say, watching over the child, and exactly the opposite when you turn your back and your face is the other way, then you can't observe. And how can you tend to the needs? And that's the picture that David has. And so as a question is addressed to the Lord, that it looks to me like you're facing the other way. You're unaware of what's going on here. I'm struggling. You've forgotten me. How can you care for me with what is going on? And now another effect in verse 2 to this whole thing. He says, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? The idea there that David has, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts, is how long do I have to hold court internally? And I tend to look at it and say, it's not disrelated from God facing the other way and being unconcerned and uninvolved with David. David saying, how long is it just me here wrestling with these things? How long am I not able to speak with you? How long am I not able to counsel with you, Lord, with what is going on? How long is it just me? And it's day after day, it's day and it's night, it's all day long that I'm wrestling with these things in my heart and that I have sorrow. And then a further thing for David as a king, he always had threats from inside of the nation, inside of his own household. You remember Absalom, his son, who tried to take over the throne, for instance. Threats from foreign invaders that were always there. How long will my enemy triumph over me? How long will my enemy, the word is really be exalted over me, have the upper hand over me? What is going on here in the background? We don't exactly know. It seems that either he's having a specific issue of somebody attacking him, an enemy, or maybe he's got a sickness and an illness that is holding him down and threatening his life even. Maybe he's got the coronavirus, right? Something like that is affecting him, and he's seeing these threats that are there, and nothing would bring his enemy and those who are against the anointed of God would bring them more joy and more satisfaction to know that he's on his deathbed and he's dying, and they can walk in to exert power and influence over the throne again. This is a neat verse here because it doesn't really come through necessarily as much as it does in the Hebrew and the English, the intensity behind this. Look on me and answer me, or answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. David is really, the way that this is spoken, he's got an intense feel. Look at me, Lord. Look at me and answer. There's an intense emotion there that is behind that. There's some stress and some strain that David is feeling between he and God in the middle of his circumstance. And he wants nothing more than to give light to my eyes, and that is really a poetical, a Hebrew way of talking about bring me life. If I'm in the dark here, if I can't see, then what can I do? And the light of God bringing life to the eyes, changes life. I think of the Psalm 118. Your word has to do with the word of God in your life. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path. That idea of light is so big in the Christian life and the faithful life of a believer. That it runs throughout the scriptures. So give light to my eyes, or I'll be sleeping in death. My enemy will say I've overcome him. My foes will rejoice when I fall. The last phrase there, I couldn't help but think of, I'm actually a boxing fan. So I go back and I've seen all the great fights. And I think of the Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire, Africa. Ali Boumaier, he had all the natives chanting for that fight, and had all the natives on his side. Ali Boumaier against George Foreman when he was heavyweight champion, this big, seemingly invincible man, and all the people that are there on Ali's side, and it was the 8th round, I believe, when Ali finally came off of the ropes and hit Foreman a couple of times, and that last shot he hit him in the head, and Foreman kind of staggered across the ring and fell down. But during that exchange, those 4 or 5, the crowd in the background and the noise just grew and intensified, and yes, and that's kind of the picture that I got reading this last verse. My enemies will say I've overcome, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. My enemies will rejoice because and it really is because I'm teetering here. I'm falling, I'm tripping, I'm like Foreman across trying to gather my feet, knowing full well I'm falling, I'm on my way down. And what David doesn't want is his foes to be able to say, look at God's anointed, he's toppling, he's falling, I've overcome him, I stand triumphant over him, which is gives you a heart into what David's prayer is here. I couldn't help thinking of Moses when God, the golden calf, go down there and tell those people, your people are doing this, and I will destroy those people, and I will raise you, Moses, into a great nation. And Moses says, no, wait, hold on a second here. They're your people. You don't want Egypt to say, look what God did, brought his people out of the land of Egypt only to destroy them in the desert. You don't want to make that your reputation. And it's kind of a neat twist and a change of looking at things. And God, David is looking here and saying, I don't want people to say of his anointed that they are triumphant over it, because it's going to reflect bad on you too. It's a neat prayer, and look at the close of this. What a transition here from this struggle and this pain that David has to this. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. Neat little kind of contrast here. My enemies will rejoice as I'm teetering here. Well, where's my joy? Well, it's in your salvation and your deliverance, Lord. And the other thing that I thought of when I was reading this, it's not as if David had been removed from that difficult time. Say it's a sickness, and he's out with some kind of a virus, and it's going on, and it's causing pain, and it's causing problems. And in the middle of that, he's saying, I trust in your unfailing love. The virus didn't impact that. My heart rejoices. I am filled with joy because of your salvation, your deliverance. He hadn't been delivered, but there was a greater deliverance that God had given him, and his heart, even in the middle of it, was rejoicing in it and taking heart there. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. That's a cool verb that is behind there, and there's a part of that verb that he's been good to me, and it's not like he's showered me with deliverance from sickness. He's showered me with security on the throne. He has showered me with riches beyond compare. He's showered me with 4 vacation homes. He's adequately given me what I needed. And that was the cause of David being able to rejoice in his heart over his relationship with his God, even as he was questioning it and struggling with it. And the reason for his song on his lips is because God had been good to him, good enough to him, certainly given him more than he needed to take care of him in an adequate way. And that was David's reason for trust and reason for hope and reason for joy in this life, which is applicable to us. I mean, I hope we're going to God and praying for deliverance from this for all the right reasons. But it also is an opportunity to think of maybe some things that do come up. If I'm worried about this and I'm struggling with this and I'm anxious about this, does this somehow mean that I'm not a believer? God's people throughout time have wrestled with this. I've wrestled with many of them. through loss, through pain, through sickness, through the valley of the shadow of death. That is not, there's no reason to despair of that. The worries and the concerns of life that we have and the anxieties of life are hopefully doing what David did with it, driving us to our God, to search for him again, and to realize we might have relied on ourselves, we might have relied on our job, on our family, on science and innovation and all these things in life, and they're all fine and good, and they're blessings from God, and they buy some time here for us on this earth, but they're not God. They just aren't. God has a funny way of grabbing us under the chin and lifting us up until our eyes actually get to see him again. Just because we struggle in this life doesn't mean that our faith is vacant or gone, nor does it mean that if we're in the faith, things should be happy and joyful all the time. I listened yesterday on Jim's lead. I listened to a segment of Joel Osteen through all of this. He was interviewed, I think Chris Wallace, I guess, was on Fox News on Sunday morning and was interviewing. I saw in the article there were all kinds of people of faith. Ravi Zacharias, I watched him, he's good. But the idea of Joel Osteen, that you just have to be positive. I believe that Jesus gives you peace inner when you or from the outside when you have it on the inside, and therefore you just have to be it. Everything that came out of his mouth was dribble. And I would imagine if you have the idea that happiness is what the faith is all about, you would be of that same mindset. And there's nothing stable there. It's like breathing the air loaded with coronavirus, spiritually is what it is. Happiness is not what faith is about, not here. Not if we're thinking our happiness comes from this world or anything it has to offer, any circumstance in a worldly way we find ourselves in, which does then get to what factors do bring us joy. And it has to be something that's far greater than anything in this world. It has to use a word that is maybe familiar with you. After every sermon, and maybe not everyone, but most sermons. Now may the peace of God that far transcends all human understanding guard your hearts and your minds. And that says a lot. The peace of God and the joy of God transcends our understanding in a human way. And what do we understand in a human way? We understand the human realm in a human way. The peace of God and the joy of God is way above that. There's our hope. There's our reason for joy. We have a Savior and a Deliverer who's taken away the most certain real thing about human existence, and that's death. Jesus took it away, flipped it on its head, and delivered us from it. That transcends it. That's everything. And if we keep our thoughts, and as the Lord keeps our thoughts there and feeds us and focuses us there, no matter what happens here, we'll have reason to rejoice. We'll have reason to be happy. We'll even find reason not to worry and be afraid in the middle of viruses and pandemics and whatever this life throws at us, because when it's here, nothing matters in our circumstance to change that thing. So that's Psalm 13. Good, valuable psalm. I think I'm going to go in a different direction with the next one. There's plenty of praise psalms that are there that teach some other things. I'll throw a little bit of a different one in next time. Other than that, I don't think that there's anything, is there, Jim? How long was that? That was over 20, wasn't it?
Right at 20.
Right at 20? Oh, bingo. It's like we're planned it. All right, good enough.